Welcome everyone, good morning. Today we're going to have some fun taking a look at Illustrator, designing content for any screen, which primarily means mobile, web, of course print, and just about anything that you would want to use Illustrator for, but primarily focused on. Today we're going to focus a little bit more heavily on web design using Illustrator. So with that said, I just want to point out a few links here I've got up on the screen in case you missed something. As Terry Hemphill said, there's going to be a recording, a link. Provided the recording is successful on my end, it will also be on my YouTube channel, which the link for that is down on the left hand side. If you miss anything, or if there's certain things that I don't cover, chances are they've been covered before in previous videos by myself or some of the other evangelists. And the link at the very bottom, tv.adobe.com, is where you can find content about Illustrator, Photoshop, InDesign, Creative Cloud products throughout, and again presented by a wide variety of presenters. If you want to know anything more about me, just head over to terrywhite.com, and with that, let's go ahead and jump in and get started. So I'm going to pop out of Bridge. I won't be needing that right now, and let's head over to Illustrator. So here I am in Illustrator CC, and as you know, as far as Illustrator is concerned, being a Creative Cloud product, it is constantly getting new updates, new features. So some of the things that I'll be covering hopefully towards the end were just introduced as of January this year. So Creative Cloud products get updated regularly, and Illustrator is a moving target. It's always getting new things. But that doesn't mean that I won't cover some of the existing features, which I plan to do right now, that have been in Illustrator maybe a version or two. So for example, one of the first things we're going to talk about is when you go to create a new document, and let's go ahead and do that. You'll get a choice of what profile you want to do. So if you know that you're going to create a document for print, then you can choose print, and Illustrator will set up the document for the best results for a print document. If you know that you're going to do web, which we're going to do today, then it will set up a document for web in the best results. Or you're going to do it for mobile devices. Perhaps you're writing an app. You could do it for that, or you're doing it for video and film, so forth and so on. So you can start with any one you want, and again, your primary target for the document. So for example, if I were designing a logo that I knew was going to be used in print and on screen, then I'd probably start with print as the lowest common denominator. But since we're sticking with web today, we're going to go ahead and say web. We still get the choice of multiple artboards. Again, that's not a new feature. Illustrator's had that now for a couple of versions. And one thing I do want to point out here, when you choose web, one of the newer features is that it will automatically align new objects on the canvas to a pixel grid. And what this results in is sharper images online, sharper images on screen. Now let's say you started out with a print document and that was turned off. You can go in and enable that even after the document's created, and any new objects will be aligned to that grid, and you can also snap existing objects to the grid once it's been turned on. So I just wanted to point that out. That is one of the reasons why we're starting with the web profile, because it by default turns that option on for us. Now we'll go ahead and click OK. And one of the other things that we talked about in the description for the session today is just, again, taking a look at some of the things that will help you with your designs going forward. And one of those things that we're going to take a look at is dealing with symbols. So symbols, again, not a new feature, been there for years. But a lot of people that are new to InDesign or new to web design don't necessarily know how to take advantage of it. So I'm going to go ahead and bring up the symbols panel. And the symbols panel by default is going to have some default symbols. Now these are the ones that come with Illustrator. You can of course choose different symbol libraries. So we have tons of symbol libraries for you to choose from. So for example, if I was looking for web buttons and bars, I can go ahead and pull that one up, and I can then scroll through and have a variety of different symbols for me to play with. So again, all of this content already there. You don't have to worry about creating it. So if you need a nice button for your website, something that kind of looks like a more modern user interface, and you don't want to take the time to have to draw it, chances are there's a symbol for it. Now, how do I use any of these symbols? Well, there's a few ways to do it. One, I can just drag one out onto the canvas. There it is. I can also use a tool to spray the symbols. So there's a symbol sprayer. And basically with the symbol selected, I can either click and add as many of these as I want, or I can spray them. So again, you probably wouldn't do that for buttons, but you may do that for some of the other more decorative symbols, such as leaves, or something that you're trying to spray around your canvas in a more artistic fashion. So the symbol sprayer, that little spray can icon, can be used at one click at a time, or it can be used to simply spray out a bunch of symbols for decoration. So I'm going to undo all of these and just basically get back to the one that I created. Of course, I can go in and Option or Alt drag, and using our Smart Guides feature, that will help me keep that aligned and I get that nice and spaced properly. And now if I want a few more of those buttons, I can of course hit Command D for transform again, or Control D on Windows to transform again, and again to get those exactly spaced as the first two were spaced apart. So again, that's more of a tips and tricks kind of thing. Been there in Illustrator for a long time, certainly not new, but cool that we can go ahead and do that. Now, what if you wanted to create your own symbol? How would that work? Well, let's say that we wanted to go to the rounded rectangle here, and we want to go ahead and just drag out a rounded rectangle, and I want to fill that with a gradient. So I'll use the gradient tool and just click into it. And the gradient tool, new, I believe, as of Illustrator CS6, allows me this nice new controller to control how that gradient is going to appear. I can, of course, space it. I can add more points to choose more colors. I can do whatever I want to kind of interactively create that gradient right here on the button itself. Now, once that button has been defined, meaning I've created it looking the way I want, and now I want to turn that into a symbol, all I would do is just simply drag it into the symbols panel, and then I'm going to get the new symbol dialog, and we're going to call this the How button. And I can then choose whether or not I want that to be a movie clip type of symbol, which for those of you who want to go back in time, that's more of a flash kind of thing or an animation kind of thing, or just simply a graphic symbol. I can also enable guides for 9-slice scaling. We'll talk about that in a moment once we go to edit the button, but then we'll click OK, and now that has become a symbol for me to use in the future. So if I want to, again, use any of the methods that we talked about a minute ago, I can drag that out. I can create as many of those as I need. Again, we can use the Smart Alignment feature. I can space that one out. And again, Command D to continue making more of those. Now, here's the beauty of symbols. So far, nothing I've done you couldn't have done just by copy, paste, or duplicate. So why is a symbol important? Well, a symbol is important that if you double click on it, first of all, I'm going to get my guides for 9-slice scaling, which I enabled. And what I'm doing with these guides is, you notice I'm isolating the corners of this button. And what I'm doing by isolating those corners is I'm saying that if I scale this object now, I don't want the corners to scale. So in other words, keep the corners, keep them with their same amount of roundness. Don't stretch the corners. That's what the 9-slice scaling is for. All right, but anyway, the beauty of this, now that I've drilled down into it, is that if I go back to my gradient tool, and let's say that let's say that we tilt it here, and we adjust the gradient a little bit more. We'll make it a little bit darker. And now and again, this is very important, I've drilled down into the symbol. So in the upper left-hand corner, it's like a browser. This is my back button to get back out of having drilled down into it. And also, I'll do one more thing. I want to change the stroke to none. So now that I've done those changes and I back out of it, it's updated all the ones on the page. That's what you wouldn't get with a simple copy and paste. The other thing that a symbol will help you with, as far as just Illustrator is concerned in general, is that when you use symbols, you're using a lot less memory and a lot less horsepower in Illustrator, because instead of that being 5 independent graphics that it has to keep track of. It's actually keeping track of one symbol that's been referenced 4 more times. So Illustrator is more efficient. Illustrator becomes faster. Your page loads faster. Things work faster in Illustrator when you're using symbols for replicated objects as opposed to just replicating the objects. So that's for any kind of design, not just web design. If you're going to have items that are repeating but are identical, then it's probably better to use a symbol for those items than to just duplicate the items. Now, if you're doing 1 or 2 and that's all you're going to ever do, then maybe, and they're never going to change, then copy paste is fine or duplicate's fine. But if you're going to use a bunch of these, you're going to use these throughout your design, and you want to always update one and it updates all of them to keep them consistent, then you probably want to use symbols to do that. Okay, so that was again a refresher, not something that is horribly new inside of Illustrator. And again, I can make changes to them independently, such as scaling and rotation, without them affecting the others. But if I go ahead and edit that one, scale it and rotate it, then it would affect the others. So you can kind of have the best of both worlds. Treat one differently than the others, or edit it to make them all the same. So again, that's today is Thursday, so that's a throwback Thursday on symbols for those of you who hadn't used symbols before. And again, that's not a new Illustrator feature. That has been there for a while. So I'm going to go ahead and just clear some of this off the canvas. Again, I deleted those, but my symbol, if I went back to my symbol library, my symbol is still there. So even though I've deleted them off the canvas, because I added that as a symbol, I can always pull those back on if I need them. Now, the next thing we're going to talk about is, this is new inside of Illustrator, working with Typekit fonts. And this is important, especially for those of you who are going between print and web design. So in our web products, for example, and such as Adobe Muse and Dreamweaver, we've got Typekit built in. That means we get a variety of different web fonts that work great on the web. However, if I were to click my type tool now and I type the word how, and we'll just go ahead and hold down my command key and stretch that out bigger, or control key on Windows. And while we've got this, let's go ahead and kern it a little bit. There we go, or track it a little bit better. And now we've got this nice new how text. And let's say that I want to change the font of that. Well, of course, I would highlight it. I would then get my character or type controls if I'm in the type tool. So hang on, let's do that. And so for example, I could go in here, let's go to our type menu and do it. I can choose my fonts. I can choose whichever font I want to do this with, and I'll get the open type fonts, TrueType, Type 1, and I'll get the samples of them, and that's all great. But you'll notice now that we have a add fonts from Typekit. And when I do that option, what that will give me is it will take me over to the Typekit website, and what it will allow me to do is pick any fonts that I want to install inside Illustrator, I want to have or use inside Illustrator. Now, first of all, that menu option from the from the font menu taking me over here, that is a new feature as of January. If we bring up the character panel, we get the same kind of control when we bring up the font menu here, add fonts from Typekit. So it would do the same thing. It would take me over to the website. But let's now go ahead and pick a font that we want to use for this how text that we have. So let's pop back over to the website, and we can just simply browse by scrolling down and scrolling down to see which ones we want to use. We can also, I've filtered it for desktop use, and I could filter it for web use. That way I'm going to get fonts that are applicable or available, I should say, in both formats. So in other words, if I have both of those filters set, I'm going to have fonts that are available for web use and desktop use, which means I can design here in Illustrator and know that if I put this design in Dreamweaver or Muse, that I would be able to use the same typography because those fonts are available in Typekit for the web as well. Now I can search for classification. So for example, let's say I'm looking for a nice, here we'll just play around with some of the decorative fonts here. I'm looking for a nice decorative font. I can go scroll through them, And by the way, this font library is valued at over $35,000 for the desktop, and that's of it. All of these are available to you as a full Creative Cloud member. So I can just continue scrolling down until I see something I like or want to try. And actually, let's see if I see one I want to do here. I'm picky when it comes to fonts. Let's try the Viva Standard. So I'm going to go ahead and say Use Fonts. And font selected, one of three. It's going to give me the bold. I can say Show All Fonts. But I'm going to go ahead and say Select or Sync Selected Fonts. Now what that just did, just by me telling it to sync, is it's already added that font, Viva Standard Bold, to my system. So meaning that Typekit has managed that font in the background using the Creative Cloud app. If I switch back over to Illustrator and I bring up that same character panel, and I now bring up the font list, one of the other hidden gems here is that I can just simply say, well, I don't want to have to scroll down and find it. Just filter and show me all my Typekit fonts. So these are the Typekit fonts I've installed, including Viva Standard. So I did not have to quit Illustrator. I did not have to relaunch anything. I did not have to bring up my downloads folder and go find the font and install the font or manage the font with anything else. It was all done seamlessly behind the scenes and available to me not only in Illustrator, but any of my Creative Cloud products, and guess what? Any other product on your computer that can use fonts. Yes, even PowerPoint. If you have to use that font in PowerPoint and you launch PowerPoint now, it would be available. I dread that if that were the case, but if you do have to, it's there for you to use. So these aren't just Creative Cloud fonts, these are fonts. And again, they're available to me whether I do it from Illustrator or InDesign, or if I just simply go up to the Creative Cloud application and I go to Fonts. As you saw, Viva Standard is now being managed by the font manager inside of Creative Cloud. So this is where I would go to Manage Fonts or uninstall fonts if I don't want Viva Standard anymore or any of these other ones. So, and another advantage is because I can have Creative Cloud installed on two of my computers, if I go to my other computer right now, Viva Standard is there because it's synced to the same Creative Cloud account, and therefore any fonts I install on one will be installed on the other. Okay, so that was a quick look at two things. One, symbols, going back to how many ever years ago we did symbols, and of course the new Typekit integration as of January built right into the font menu inside of Illustrator CC. Okay, so with that said, let's go ahead now and switch gears again. We're going to do a little bit more on the web. So let me go out here. I'm going to grab a document. And I'm going to go ahead and open up this Illustrator document, and we're going to get down and dirty with web design. Now, speaking of getting down and dirty with web design, I'm going to go ahead and close this extra symbols panel. I've been using my typical Terry White workspace. And of course, it's got the panels and things organized the way that I like to use Illustrator on a regular basis. But since I'm going to be doing web design, and I want just to quickly have all my favorite web panels available to me, I can simply switch over to the built-in workspace for web. And that will turn on all the things that I would typically use for web design. Now, speaking of web design, let me explain a little bit about what's going on in this particular design here. So this is what happens a lot in both Illustrator and Photoshop, is that someone goes in, customer says, hey, I want you to design my website or my web page or whatever, and the person that's designing it doesn't start off in HTML. They actually start off in Illustrator or Photoshop, and in this case, Illustrator. So they mock up what they want the pay or what they want to get approval on by the client. In other words, hey, this is what your page is going to look like. Do you approve it? Yes or no? What changes would you like to make? And it's easier to do all of that here graphically before you even begin doing any of the HTML. Okay, so that's been done. And as a matter of fact, to even simulate it more, they even put in the browser kind of look behind it as a layer. So that layer is just locked and everything was built onto it. Just doing a screenshot of the browser so the client really has a look or really has an idea of what this would look like on the web. So I'm going to go ahead and zoom in a little bit. And again, these are all Illustrator pieces. Outline type, here's just a blue rectangle. These are all things that were done inside Illustrator the way you would normally draw things in Illustrator. So using the circle tool, drawing these sketches or tracing things. Basically, standard Illustrator work. However, if I go to my new CSS Properties panel, you'll notice that we have the ability to have CSS from Illustrator generated automatically. So for example, if I select the blue header here, you'll see that it's basically created the CSS for me for what that looks like. In other words, where is it getting that from? Well, if we go to our layers panel, here I'm going to go ahead and collapse swatches for a minute. And we go to our layers panel. In our layers panel on the masthead, if we scroll down, there is a header background that I've got targeted right now because I just selected it with the selection tool. And Illustrator is behind the scenes writing the CSS for what that would look like on the web. I didn't have to tell it to do that. It's just doing it for me if I happen to go over to this panel. So that is huge for anyone doing web design from a mock-up inside Illustrator. Now we're going to really put that to the test. So for example, one of the web tools that of course someone would use would be something like Dreamweaver. So I have the HTML file. Now Illustrator didn't write the HTML, it's just writing the CSS. So someone actually wrote an HTML page, and in Dreamweaver here I've got the code on the left hand side and a live preview on the right hand side. And as you can see on the right hand side, it is very unstyled. It's just someone who went in and laid out the HTML inside Dreamweaver for what these items should look like. Now if I go head back to Illustrator, and I simply copy that code, and here I'm going to move Illustrator out just a little bit so I can get past the Citrix panel over here. If I go out here and there's a copy selected style, so I'm just going to go ahead and copy that style. And once I've got that style copied, I'm going to go ahead and head back over to Dreamweaver, and I'm just going to go ahead and simply paste that code in. And since this is a live update, if I head over here, it's actually styled that border for me. So basically, just copying that code, a web developer could say, okay, just hand me your Illustrator file, because now I don't have to rewrite everything. I don't have to figure out what you did. I can just go ahead and grab the CSS directly from Illustrator to style my pages. Okay, pretty cool. What about the text? How does that work? Well, let's head back over to Illustrator. And for example, you'll notice that in the CSS properties, there are actually these styles. There's one P, caps, so forth and so on. Well, where are those coming from? Well, if I go up to my window menu and I come down to type and I bring up character styles, you'll notice something familiar. These are the exact same style names in the character styles as they are here in the CSS property. So in other words, here let's prove it. Let's deselect, let's grab the type tool, let's go ahead and grab or just create a text box out here on the side here, and I'm just going to go ahead and again type the word how. We'll go ahead and make it bigger, Command Shift greater than, by the way, and we'll make that bigger, and we'll just go ahead and choose a font for it. Here we'll use the Viva Standard. Here we'll make it a little smaller so it fits. Okay, so now what I want to do is make a new character style based on that. And I'm going to make this new character style, and I'm going to call it headline. Okay, so now that I've created that new character style called headline, if I go over here to my, CSS properties, let's deselect. There is my headline style for the CSS that it just created for me. So character styles automatically map to CSS properties so that when you want to copy your CSS and put it inside Illustrator, it's all done. So the next thing I'm going to do is, I don't need this one, so I'm going to go ahead and delete it. And I don't need that character style, so I'm going to go ahead and trash it. And yes, I want to delete it. And of course, that will take it out of the CSS properties, because again, the CSS properties are mapping whatever you've done in character styles. I can go ahead and close my character styles panel now because we're not going to create any more new ones. And what I want to do is I want to select all the styles. So I'm going to go up to the top here and scroll down to the bottom and hold down my shift key and select them all. So now that I've got all the styles selected, I'm going to do one more time. I'm going to do a copy selected styles, and I'm going to head back over to Dreamweaver, and right after that last paste we did, I'm going to paste in all of those. So again, it grabbed each one of those styles, P, caps, so forth and so on, put it in the HTML, or I'm sorry, put it in the CSS to style all of those fonts. So all of my fonts now have been styled accordingly based on the Illustrator styles that I've done. So far, so good. Looks great. But that's kind of tedious. It's kind of getting to the point to where, again, we're taking a huge jump from where we would have been had we had to do all this from scratch to just simply copying and pasting. But can we take it up a notch? Can we really do this and really get this to do more? In other words, we're never satisfied, right? So let's go back to Illustrator. And I want Illustrator to do even more for me. Yes, I'm not satisfied. I want to deselect everything. And what I want to do now is select everything on the page. So in my selection tool, I'm just going to say select all. Grab every single thing that's on the page except the browser Chrome, because that's on a layer that's locked, so it did not get selected. But basically select everything that was drawn inside Illustrator. And now that I've selected everything that's drawn inside Illustrator, I'm going to move this panel over just a little bit more. We've got some other buttons here on the CSS properties. Now we've been using the copy button. There's an export selected CSS button, and there's an export options button, and there's a generate CSS. And that's the one that we really want to do. So we want to generate, here, let's go back to generate CSS. So basically it's generated all the CSS from what we just selected on the page. And now what I want to do is say export selected CSS. So when I say export selected CSS, I can tell it where to put it. So I'm going to, what to call it. So I'm going to call this my.css. So I'm making a CSS file that Illustrator's creating for me from everything that was styled on that page, every single graphic. And I'm going to go ahead and save it to the same folder as everything else. And I get some options here, and the main option that I want to include is generate CSS for unnamed objects. So I want to make sure that's selected, and we'll just go ahead and click OK. So it's done. There it is. That was the progress bar. It's 2 seconds. It's done. So Illustrator has now generated a CSS file. I can deselect everything now. That's in that folder with the rest of my content. Now let's head back to Dreamweaver and actually use it. What I want to do here is, you notice that there is a import tag or import command to import the base CSS. In other words, the basic CSS that's describing what we saw on the page thus far. Well, I'm going to copy that because I'm not really good at writing my own HTML. I'm just going to copy that, and we'll go ahead and hit enter or return after and paste it back in, but I'm going to change it from base to my. In other words, bring in the one that I just had Illustrator create. And since it knows, it's in the same folder, now if I go over here, voila, done. It brought in all of that content. Here we can just go ahead and say, look at the live aspect of it. Actually, the design of it. There we go. And there it is, brought in and styled not only the CSS, but it exported out all the web graphics as well. So if someone can write the basic HTML blank page and put in the text that they want, Illustrator will handle the CSS and the graphics for you. So the only thing that the HTML coder had to do was write the initial basic HTML page with the text on it, and Illustrator did everything else. All right, and of course they can then go back and tweak it to their heart's content because they are in code. If you like to write code, if you like to mess with code, by all means, go mess with the code. Now I notice there's something missing. That outdoor thing is missing from here. Well, what's up with that? Let's head back to Illustrator. And in Illustrator, I've got the outdoor is basically SVG, Scalable Vector Graphics. And I'm going to copy it. Just going to hit Command C on the Mac, Control C on Windows, and copy it. Because Illustrator not only can copy this as a graphic or as outline text, but it can also copy the code underneath, which is the SVG. So let's head back over to Dreamweaver, and let's scroll down to a line where I've got that placeholder that my coder left for me. Paste the SVG here. So I'm just going to go ahead and highlight that that tag or that note, and I'm just going to go ahead and, or that comment I should say, and just paste in the SVG. This is all the SVG that Illustrator wrote to make that scalable vector graphic for me. It's a lot of code to do that, but it did. And so now if I head over here, there's my outdoor. It just made it for me. So scalable vector graphics, CSS, whether you're doing it piece by piece, CSS property by CSS property, or you want Illustrator to do all the CSS and all the graphics for you, it has never been easier to go from a web mockup that you've done inside Illustrator to actually the web page than ever before. And again, it's not writing, I just want to make clear, it's not writing the HTML, but it is writing the CSS, it is exporting the graphics, and it is writing the SVG. So that means minimal work for the HTML coder to actually make the basic page for this to go on, and let Illustrator do the rest. And the beauty of it is, for those that love to work in code, you still got all the code here to tweak to your heart's content to do whatever else you want to do with. So that is the best of both worlds. So with that said, let's go ahead and now talk a little bit more about responsive design. So I'm going to head back over to Illustrator. Actually, I'm going to head over to the desktop here, and I'm going to grab a Illustrator document. Here, we'll open up this one. And in this Illustrator document, I'm going to switch views. I've saved a view here. And this sail with a whale is, of course, an Illustrator vector object, vector graphics. And if I were to simply save for web and make this a ping or a JPEG or whatever and put it on my web page, it would be a static graphic, as it always has been. But now in this world of people wanting more and more responsive design, the graphics can't just be static, they need to also adjust. So, and the problem with vectors is that they don't adjust nicely when they're scaled, because they're vectors on the web, which meaning they're really not a vector format. PNG is not a vector format. SVG is. So let's go ahead and switch over to the web browser, and let's take a look at an example here. So I've got an example here. Now here we're in Chrome, so this is actually HTML, and there's that same graphic probably as a ping file. And I'm going to go ahead, and this page is responsive. So if I go ahead and adjust this page, it starts responding to the new size. And the JPEG in the background scales down because it's a JPEG. It's what it's going to do in a responsive design. And if I were to now scale, you notice the sail with a whale is not doing anything. The page is responding, everything is scaling the way it's supposed to, except the vector graphic. Because up until January, SVG, to have this nice and crisp on the web at any resolution or high DPI and everything else, in order for this to stay vector, it's going to stay the same size. Well, now that changes inside Illustrator CC. So if I head back over to Illustrator and I do a file save as, which is where we find SVG, Scalable Vector Graphics, I now have the option, here I'll save it out into the desktop because I don't want to ruin anything. I now have the option when I go into my more options of making this a responsive SVG. So what that means is instead of it being a pixel-based graphic, it will stay scalable vectors, meaning looking crisp on any screen, any size, any resolution. But more importantly, the any size screen will now be responsive and scale the vectors to be crisp on any display. So once that export has happened and placed inside of the HTML, we head back over to the browser and we switch to the responsive version of this, and notice it's already scaled out to be the width of the page, and it's nice responsive design. And the difference is, instead of this being a bitmap that just looks worse or better, or depending on how you scale it, this will always look good or great on any resolution in any display. High DPI, not high DPI, small screen, phone screen, whatever it takes. This is scaling vectors, not scaling pixels. And that's the big difference. So scalable vector graphics, now a part of Illustrator CC, and more importantly, responsive scalable vector graphics and for your design. So, that was a lot. That was a lot of web stuff done in a very short amount of time, but I hope you got something out of that. But we're not going to leave you here. I have a few more things to show you. Kind of just more of an update on some new things inside Illustrator CC. And then we'll open it up for questions. So let's continue. I'm going to head out back to the Finder here. I'm going to open up my next document. And for those of you who hadn't seen some of the newer things inside of the January update for Illustrator CC, I'll now take you through a few of those. So first and foremost, the new live corners. So for example, when I select this graphic, you'll notice that we've got the points for each one of the corners that this has been created. This little mountain scene has been drawn. Well, when I go to my direct selection tool, you'll notice that in addition to the actual points that make up this graphic, points and paths, we've got these little round handles. And these little round handles allow me to adjust the corners interactively to round them. So live corners inside Illustrator CC. Now, of course, that was rounding all of them because I had the entire graphic selected. If I don't have the entire graphic selected and I have just one point selected, it will round the one point. Also, if I were to double click on the handle, I get to specify exactly how precise and how round I want things to be. So live corners inside Illustrator CC as of January this year. And that was, again, one of the new updates. All right, so let's see if I've got a view saved for this. I do. Good. Let's head over to this area. And this is probably, I would say, my favorite new feature inside Illustrator CC. This is because this is the one that's going to impact the way I use Illustrator the most. And that is drawing, because I don't draw. I'm not an artist. I wish I were. I wish I were. I wish I were. I've been trying for years, but I just can't draw. But now I can at least attempt to draw a lot easier than I ever could before. So one of my favorite tools from years ago was the pencil tool. The pencil tool's been in Illustrator for a long time, and for those of you who are laughing because you know how the pencil tool works, trust me, you're going to love the pencil tool from here on out. So first and foremost, when you double click the pencil tool, there's a new option for fidelity. And typically, I'm going to put it back to the way Illustrator used to work. Illustrator used to be what would default to accurate because there was no choice. So I'm going to click OK. And I'm even going to use my Wacom stylus. I'm going to do the best job I can to try and create one of these. So here we go. Not great. It's okay. But not great. And the problem is it's being very accurate. So let me move the pen out of the way. Everywhere that I drew this and paused, it kind of reshaped it. That's what it was doing. It was being very accurate because it figured, hey, I'm going to do exactly what you're telling me to do. And how many times have you said, no, don't do what I said, do what I wanted? because that's what we really want in life. We want the tools to do what we want, not necessarily always what we say. So I'm going to switch back to the pencil tool, double click on it, and switch it all the way over to smooth instead. Click OK, and I'm going to attempt to do the same exact thing. So we're going to come over here. We'll come on this side, and we're going to try and draw the same exact thing. Here we go. And I kind of crossed over too close. Hang on, let me try it again. Oops. Redo. Redo. Okay, sorry. Let's try that again. Kind of got too tight at the top there. There we go. And as you can see, it's just a lot smoother when it's trying to draw these things that I'm trying to draw. It actually smooths them out for me. And here would probably help if we gave it a stroke. Here, let's give it a stroke here. Stroke color. There we go. So we can draw more fluidly arcs and curves and things that we would wish would be more about what we're trying to draw versus what it thinks we're trying to draw, or telling it or drawing exactly what we tell it. So that arc looking a lot closer now to what, or actually that arc looking a lot closer to what I wanted as opposed to what I actually told it to draw. So just a better tool inside Illustrator for those of you who have always wished you could draw something nice, but your hand is getting in the way. So things like that. So Illustrator, pencil tool, great. Now, the other aspect, and the reason I've always liked the pencil tool, is because if we zoom in on this a little bit, the pencil tool is one of my favorites because it always allowed me to reshape the items that I drew, whether I made a mistake or just changed my mind. So for example, if I don't want this arc to be as high as it was, I can start anywhere along this path that I already drew and say no. Oops, if I do this right, I don't know if we go that way. Reshape that, redraw this better. Give me a better, if I draw this the right way, if I actually start on it, there we go. Draw this and give me a better path. Or don't make it so tight. So just better drawing inside Illustrator CC for those who, if we actually start on the path, there we go. Sometimes I get ahead of myself. There we go. Direction is important. And okay, so better drawing inside Illustrator. One of my favorite newer features. Now, speaking of drawing, of course, traditionally, if you really want to draw accurate lines and curves, you would really use the pen tool to do that. And of course, just a quick refresher of the pen tool. Pen tool is used for drawing straight lines by clicking a point, holding down the shift key, clicking another point. It can also be used to draw curves. So just by dragging it, we can draw a nice curved path. And this has always been traditionally a more accurate, but perhaps a less fun way of doing things. But it does work. Even if you drew something with that tool and you changed your mind, you can actually now use the anchor tool. As you notice, when the anchor tool is hovering over a path, it actually allows me to now bend and reshape that path more effectively and fluidly and accurately than before. So that tool gets a new life. That last tool, the anchor point tool, allows me to reshape. And of course, even if you drew it with the pencil tool, or I'm sorry, pen tool, and you wanted to reshape it with the pen tool, or I'm sorry, you wanted to reshape it with the pencil tool, you could. So you can start out very accurate and kind of get more free-formed, or you can start out free-formed and get more accurate, or both, any mixture of the two. Now, speaking of straight lines, the pencil tool, as you can see, was never really good at first for drawing straight lines. Now it's a lot better. And now, of course, we can hang on here, if we hold down the Shift key while we're using the pencil tool, we can actually get straight lines. So the pencil tool, a lot more fun now in Illustrator CC. And of course, live corners. Now I'm going to wrap things up here. Let's see if I can get this going. And I've got one more cool thing to kind of show you here, and this revolves around color. So many of you may remember we introduced earlier, or actually a little bit late in 2013, a new iPhone app. And I'm going to go into Adobe here. The iPhone app in particular is the Cooler app. So when I bring up the Cooler app, it's going to show me my themes that I've got created here. I'm waiting for my screen to refresh. I've actually brought the app up. And this is the problem with doing wireless live. Come on. Maybe, maybe not. I've launched the app. It's up on my phone. Just waiting for the screen update. All right, let me turn it off. Ah, it went away. Okay, maybe I won't get to show you this. My screen sharing for the phone is giving me an issue. Let's see if we can bring it up again. If I don't get a chance to show you this, head over to the App Store and just download the Cooler app for free. Let's try it one more time. All right, here it is. Now you notice in the bottom right hand corner there's a camera icon. I'm going to bring up the camera, and the camera lets me, of course, scan my environment. And as you can see, the circles move around to let me pick, or let it randomly pick, the colors in the scenes around me. So I'm going to go ahead and snap that scene. It will capture it. Again, there we go. It did catch up with me. I'm going to rename this theme How. And we'll go ahead and save the changes. So now that's my new How theme that's in red there. And at this point, I can, continue using my phone. I can be out and about. I'm going to turn off the screen share for the phone at this point. There we go. But when I come back to Illustrator at any given time, and I bring up the Cooler panel inside Illustrator, you'll notice that there is a refresh button. And when I hit refresh, what that will do is go out to Creative Cloud and grab any new themes that I've captured, including the How theme. So for example, if I now want to use this in my design, I want to use a color that I've captured, I can go ahead and select any one of those colors that I've captured while I was out and about that inspired me to use them when I get back to my designs inside Illustrator. Whether I'm designing for print or web, I've got these cool colors that I captured while I was out. So those are the things I had to show you today. Terry, I think I'm going to turn it back over to you for questions. I'm going to repeat if there are any questions so that they are captured on my recording as well. So if you hear me repeating it, even though you already heard it, that's the reason. Okay, well, again, I'll hang out here for a second or two. Oh, there are questions coming in. Okay. Does Typekit interfere with font book? And the answer is absolutely not. Now, speaking of font management, whether it's font book, Suitcase, or any of the other variety of great font managers out there, your font managers do what they always did. They manage the fonts you got from all the other places you got fonts from, whether you bought them from the traditional Adobe library, you bought them online, you had them already. Those will continue to work and continue to manage the fonts that you already manage with those managers. So for example, all my traditional Adobe OpenType fonts that I've had for years are still in font book where they will, where they reside. However, the Typekit fonts are managed by the Creative Cloud app. So the two don't interfere with each other. They work seamlessly together. And again, the entire font list appears in the application, whether it's a Typekit font or a non-Typekit font, I guess is the easiest way to say it. Now, the only problem you would have as far as a conflict, And again, Typekit will warn you of this, is let's say I tried to go to Typekit desktop fonts and I tried to download Myriad Pro. It's going to say, well, you already have Myriad Pro, because I did already have it being managed inside FontBook as part of the desktop fonts that I already had. So it's going to warn me if there's a duplicate, but the two do work well together. I believe that Cooler's cloud, or I should say that Cooler part of it, is more tied to an Adobe ID. So it's not so much whether it's working with Creative Cloud or not, it's really can you get to an Adobe ID with it. So for example, if I go to cooler.adobe.com, I'll bring up the website here, and I sign in with that same Adobe ID, then my themes would be there for me to choose. So that's really, or actually my themes would be there. That's really what it's tied to, more so than your Creative Cloud account per se. Since Cooler is free, it's not restricted by Creative Cloud. That's the point I'm trying to make. So the question was Cooler available for Android today? And the answer is not today. We're always considering options. I don't have any. I don't have an Android announcement, I'll say, today. Is Cooler available in Photoshop? Not today. So the Cooler, actually there is a Cooler panel in Photoshop, but it's the old one. So it's not the one that's tied into your Adobe ID. I have not personally used it other than a few minutes in demoing it. So the question was, have I used the Wacom Cintiq Companion, and does it work well with Creative Cloud? I have not used it more than a few minutes, meaning Wacom handed me one, said, hey, what do you think of this? And I played around with it, and it seemed to run Illustrator great, it seemed to work great, but I've not used it beyond just a few minutes. Good question. Does Cooler capture swatches in CMYK, or is it just RGB? Currently it's RGB. Okay, so good question. What happens to Typekit Fonts if you don't have Creative Cloud anymore for some reason? I disable my subscription, I stop subscribing, whatever. So there's two parts to that question. So first of all, just like with anything else, if you no longer subscribe, then your applications and therefore your fonts for building new content would no longer work. The content that already has your fonts would still have your fonts, but they would no longer be on your system to make any edits. Now, the difference though with Typekit for the web, so the web fonts, so for example, let's say I have a website that's up and running and I stop doing Creative Cloud. That website and those Typekit fonts would still function. I just wouldn't be able to design, because I wouldn't have that application anymore, any changes or new things with new fonts or the same fonts over again. So we don't disable anything as far as the Typekit on the web is concerned. That website would run forever as long as Typekit is available, forever. It would still work, but you just wouldn't be able to do any new authoring, I should say. I'm not familiar with the Edge web fonts, but I thought they were one and the same. I could be wrong, totally wrong on that, because Edge is not one of the products I cover regularly. But I'd have to look, to be honest. So I'm not going to guess one way or the other. Illustrator doesn't do animation. The question was, does Adobe have the ability to animate SVG in Illustrator or other apps? And number one, Illustrator doesn't do animation. So if you were going to try and do it, it wouldn't be in Illustrator anyway. Our animation tool for the web is Edge Animate, and Edge Animate creates HTML5 compatible animations. However, as far as I know, it doesn't do vector or SVG scalable animations that are responsive. So I don't think that feature's there yet. So the question was, what are my options for viewing Typekit fonts for my web design inside Illustrator? Is there any other way to do it besides going to the website that I have currently on the screen? And as far as I know, there's no preview of Typekit for Illustrator inside Illustrator. So it would be either the website or previewing them in the web tools that I mentioned, such as Dreamweaver and Muse. So for example, here, since Muse is the product I work with the most, if I were to launch Muse and just create a quick site, and I wanted to do something with Typekit, for example, new site, okay, new page, and text tool, and again how, select all, and I now bring up web fonts. There we go. This is going to be my preview inside the web tool. So it's loading the font preview, and then I get to choose which ones I want. So I'm seeing them here. Other than that, I don't know of any way of previewing the web fonts outside of the web tools that they appear in. No, guys. If you want to see more, just head over to tv.adobe.com or terrywhite.com if you want to see more from me. Otherwise, I hope you learned something. I had a great time showing this.